Welcome to Florida's Wealthy Divorces, Complex Cases, Expert Advice.
Hello and welcome to Florida's Wealthiest Divorces, Complex Cases, Expert Advice with Stacy and Beaulieu-Fawcett. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're talking about one of the most challenging aspects of divorce, child custody. When high net worth individuals are involved, custody battles can become incredibly complicated, emotional, and high stakes. Stacy is here to unveil how custody proceedings work in these intense cases, from managing accusations to ensuring the child's best interests remains the focus. Today's conversation is packed with valuable insights. Stacy, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. It's great to see you.
All right, so let's talk about the basics of custody. We kind of touched on it a little bit in the end of our last episode, but what is the general rule in Florida when it comes to deciding custodial matters of minor children when parents are divorcing? Like, what are the courts looking at?
So the courts really have 21 best interest factors that they have to consider. They're not really allowed to consider much outside of those 21 factors, and it's too much for us to, quite frankly, too boring to go over each of them individually. But I'll give you a nice, good flavor for what they're looking at. In those 21 factors that the court has to consider, is one parent significantly better than the other one? Because the starting place for timesharing in Florida is equal timesharing. So we and you and everyone uses the term custody just because we all know what we're talking about when we say custody. But in Florida, custody, the term custody has been eliminated from the statute. So it's not even part of the terminology. What it really means is how much time are the kids going to spend with mom and with dad? And in that situation, we're talking about time sharing. So custody, no longer there. We will use it because everyone knows what we're talking about when we say custody, right? We start from a place of 50-50, equal time with mom, equal time with dad. So then why do we need best interest factors? Well, because just because we start there doesn't mean that we have to stay there. Those 21 factors are the court really looking at, okay, we'll start here. Parents are equal, but does one parent really, really outshine the other when we look at these specific factors? In general, the flavor of the factors is which parent has been the one to really be the primary parent of the kids. Now, sometimes that's both. You're not going to get away from the equal time sharing unless you start looking at some of the other factors, like does one have substance abuse issues? And even, Kevin, it's so hard to get away from 50-50 time sharing now, even in those substance abuse issue cases. If the parent can show that they've rehabilitated themselves and that they're on a straight path, it's not even going to play a role in doing the 50-50 time sharing. It really has to be an active issue or frequent relapses in the past. And if it's not an active issue, what the courts are really looking to do to protect the child, we're still at 50-50, but we're going to have regular or recurring or random drug testing. A lot of times it's an alcohol abuse problem. There are things called Soberlink that we use. Are you familiar with Soberlink?
Mm-mm.
So Soberlink is a device that uses facial recognition. And it's a blowing device, like taking a breathalyzer. It attaches to the car and it will prevent the car from starting if you blow above legal limit.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I have heard of that. I did not know what it was called though. Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. And I am sure there are other brands, but in the family court, we'll use the Soberlink frequently because it's not just to not allow the car to start, but it's also a mobile device so that we know if a parent is drinking during time sharing. You know, if they are an alcoholic, if they relapse, that's a problem. For someone who's not an alcoholic and they have a glass of wine at dinner, okay, well, no, that's not a problem for your time sharing. Okay, but if you're an alcoholic and you've relapsed and you have your children, that's a problem. So the Soberlink device uses facial recognition because, of course, people will just hand someone else the device.
Yeah, I think that was in a movie, like where somebody else blows into the car.
Exactly. So facial recognition, we have so much technology now to work through these things. Blow into the device. The moment you take the test, it sends an email or a text message, however you have the settings set, alert to the other parent. Sometimes it's me as the attorney that they want receiving the notification. So I'll get the notification. People fail them all the time. For me personally, I'm like, why did you blow in it if you knew you were drinking? I don't understand. But if you fail to test at the time that you're supposed to test, it is also deemed to fail. So let's say that mom has a drinking problem. Mom is using a Soberlink device as a condition to her timesharing. I actually had this in a case just a few months back. And while mom is timesharing, it's 7 a.m. and it's her time to blow. She blows and she, of course, tests positive. It sends alerts. Dad goes and gets the children. And then other times in that same case, she wouldn't blow. She just wouldn't show up for the test and use excuses like, I slept through it, because it was an early morning one, but we wanted to catch anything from the middle of the night. We didn't want her to be able to, wake up and take care of the kids, or not have slept from the night before and take care of the kids. In this case, the children are small. Not that we shouldn't be concerned when they're older, but when they're small, they're a lot more dependent on the parent.
They're a lot more vulnerable. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we really, really worry about the small ones. We worry about the teenagers too. But a lot of times in those cases, it's the teenager calling the other parent saying, mom is drinking. And we have those cases too. It's the kids that are letting us know there's a problem. But the Soberlink is very useful for that. So if you have someone in an active substance abuse situation, the Soberlink a lot of times is the solution until they prove themselves to fail, right? So we're going to still start with 50-50 time sharing, that equal time sharing. And then when they do fail and they're screwing up, now the court's going to take it a little bit more seriously and start backing off that time sharing and taking that time sharing away, especially until they can rehabilitate themselves and get on a straight path again. So with the equal time sharing, a lot of people, maybe one parent or the other was always the one that took the kids to and from school and took the kids to and from extracurriculars. And so we go to this 50-50 time sharing, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, I have to do all of these things and I don't have time to do all of these things. So nannies a lot of times are hired and brought in to act as that substitute parent. And one of the best interest factors is looking at which parent is going to personally take care of the kids and which are going to delegate this to other people. Sometimes it's grandparents they delegated to. A lot of times these nannies have been involved in the kids' lives for a long time. So they're important parts of the children's lives, but it doesn't mean that if I can be with mom and when I'm with dad, I have to be with the nanny, that we prefer the child to be with the nanny. We want the children to be with a parent if possible. Now, I've had clients come to me and say, well, I work a lot. My physician clients, they're on call and they're working crazy hours. And my physician clients feel like they're not going to be able to have equal time sharing because they work so much. Well, the court is not going to punish them for the fact that they have a schedule and they may be called out in the middle of the night. But we do have to make sure, obviously, someone is there in the house if you get called out in the middle of the night. All right. So most recently, my physician client, he owns quite a few medical practices across South Florida, and he likes practicing medicine. Okay. God love him. He still will go out on a call in the middle of the night for different reasons. And he just, on his time sharing days, he has a live-in nanny. She stays the night there. She has her own separate facilities and she stays, because if he needs to be called out, you're not calling the nanny to come over at 3 a.m. So there are solutions to the problems. Again, one of the best interest factors looks at, are we going to delegate these responsibilities? He is, but that doesn't mean he doesn't get his kids. It's just one of 21 things to consider. What people get confused with is, well, on this one thing, I am the better parent, but it's of 21 different things. Right. And one does not have any, it's not a superpower. It doesn't have any superior or heavier weight than the others. One of them is also, who has been the person to do these routines. And as you know, in families, a lot of times the roles are divided. One spouse is tasked with taking care of the kids, getting them to and from school. The other spouse is working and providing. Very common scenario. Does the breadwinner, the provider, get punished because they weren't the ones taking the kids to school?
Because they were at work, yeah.
Right. Again, it's one of the factors. So if that's the only thing they've got going against them, they're still getting equal time sharing. We're just going to deal with the logistics and the dynamics of how we make that happen. We have people that own companies internationally. They're gone for weeks and months at a time sometimes. Do they get equal time sharing? Well, if you're not here an equal amount of time, that makes it a little hard. But a lot of times we just work around that. You give notice when you're going to have to be away. And when you get back, we do some makeup time so that you get your time. Sometimes with the smaller children, that can be problematic. It's just too inconsistent. It's long periods away from one parent or the other. So we have to work around that too. Sometimes that means, okay, until they are this age, we do one thing. And when they're this age, we do something else. So we can do step-up plans is what we call that. A step-up plan that deals with the ages and needs of the children as they grow and as the family changes.
Does the child's preference play in at all? Can a kid say like, hey, I like dad better? Is that a thing?
Very common question that I get. Almost every client asks me, at what age does my child get to decide who they go? Some states do that. Florida does not. So one of the 21 best interest factors is the child's preference, but it is not given any more weight than all the other factors. The child in Florida never, ever, ever gets to decide which parent they live with. And primarily, if you think about it, that is because if a child gets to pick, we're going to have two parents who are trying to spoil, for lack of a better term, spoil the children, give them everything that they want, give them no bedtime, no rules, no boundaries, because then who is the child going to want to be with? That parent. So Florida's legislature, in their infinite wisdom, has decided not to go that route. So, like I said, some states do. They say, you know what, when the child is 15, the child gets to choose. And Florida's legislature has decided that that is not the way to go. I agree. I agree. You're just setting the child up for failure.
Well, also like you're putting this pressure on them to make a decision. And what if they love both parents equally and they feel like they're having to choose? And what does that do to you mentally? That's tough.
It's a horrible place to put a child at any age. You think about, Kevin, just even being an adult. If someone said, listen, you need to choose mom or dad, and as adults, so many people already sort of deal with this as adults. The parents are divorced. It comes to the holidays and they've got to choose. Do I spend Thanksgiving with mom this year or with dad this year? And as adults, you watch people get so stressed out on that.
I've definitely seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you think about the fact that we're going to do this to a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and sometimes even bring them into court to have them talk about who they prefer in front of everyone. It's horrible. It's emotionally damaging. And in our last episode, you and I were talking about social investigators, the forensic psychologists that get in there and dig into what's going on. And they will dig into, without just asking the kid flat out, what the child's preference is. How do you feel when you're at mom's? And I'm sure they ask much more intelligent questions than that, but they're really digging into what is the child's preference. And they then, when they make their recommendation, part of what they will say is what the child prefers. It's, again, not the end all be all. That's not the decision-making factor, but it's something to consider. I prefer to be at mom's during the week because she helps me with my homework. Her dad works late. Those are common responses. Sure. I can't count how many cases that, that's the response is, well, mom's really bad at math and dad is really good at math. And I struggle with math. So during the week, I want to be with dad because he helps me with that. This is from a child's brain. This is what they're thinking about. This is what they're worried about, and that becomes important. The only way, typically, there are exceptions to every rule, Kevin, but the only way typically that gets in front of a judge is through that forensic psychologist process that we were talking about before.
Are there certain challenges that tend to arise when one parent has significantly more resources than the other when it comes to custody and support?
There are, but only in the short term. So in our last episode, we were talking about how one parent could kind of cut the other parent off and try to prevent them from having access to funds for an attorney. So it's the same problem, but if the parent can, whether it's borrow or use a credit card, just to be able to get to that temporary relief hearing, where we're able to show the court that the breadwinner has the ability to pay that spouse's fees. It's really just a funding problem, and it's a timing issue. Other than that, when we're talking about things like forensic psychologists and social investigations, for our wealthy families that are doing this, it's not a problem for the spouse without access to funds because the court's going to address how we're going to pay for it as well. The court's going to say, okay, it's going to come from this person's income or this person's assets, and here's how we're going to do it. Where the family's net worth or abilities or access to funds really affect the family's ability to prove these factors for timesharing is when the family as a whole does not have money to hire, like, for example, the social investigator or forensic psychologist. because proving a lot of those factors, child's preference. We're not going to bring the child into court. So how are we going to prove that? A lot of times no evidence comes in regarding that because as parents, we can't testify to anything the child has said. So there's a rule against that. It's called hearsay. And so anything the child tells you, you can't come to court, Kevin, and say, well, she told me she wants to be with me all the time because it's hearsay. So getting the child's preference into evidence becomes near impossible without this evaluator who has the ability to dig into those things and then has the ability to testify as to those things.
You made the reference earlier about how, one parent might try to bribe almost or just be the cool parent, trying to if that were a thing. I'd imagine there's a lot of situations where parents might badmouth the other parent to the kids or try to lobby in that respect. Do you find that happens often, and how do you handle those situations?
Kevin, it's probably one of the more sad situations. Of course, there are some more egregious things, but it's a sad situation because parents do that frequently. And they think that there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't harm the kid. Oh, my kid is older and more mature. But what they're forgetting about is this child deep inside knows that it is half mom and half dad. And when mom starts bad-mouthing dad or vice versa, the child takes it to heart. They may laugh with mom and say and agree all these things and, oh, I hate him. But deep inside, they are taking that as a personal attack on them. And it might not come out depending on the age until later, but it's so damaging to the kids. And it happens so frequently. It's the emotions that we keep talking about in our episodes. It's what drives some of the most poor decisions that people make. And sometimes it's in the heat of the moment through emotions. You start bad-mouthing the other parent. Some of our more egregious cases of this result in a finding of what's called alienation. So if you have a parent, I'll tell you about a case just not too long ago. I represented the dad, and the mom unfortunately just absolutely constantly bashed dad, would do anything and everything to make the kids think that dad was a bad guy. Anything from intentionally, some of the stuff is subtle, intentionally not telling dad about the recital so that dad doesn't show up. And then tells dad or tells the kids that, well, I told you, he really doesn't care about anyone but himself and his girlfriend. These are real examples from real cases, okay? And it's so common. So therein lies the alienation that a forensic psychologist doing their job is able to diagnose and say, okay, this is what's happening here. When you have a child who doesn't want to go with a parent, and in that situation, children don't want to go with dad. Well, why? It's typically one of two things. One, because dad's abused them or has, done something to really, really hurt them and they need healing. Or the other parent, mom, in that situation has alienated dad. And it typically, like I said, it comes subtle, it comes systematically. Sometimes the alienating parent doesn't even know that they're doing it. They're just so angry and emotional that they're doing it. But, intentionally withholding information from dad in this particular case, constantly bad-mouthing dad, whether it was medical appointments, recitals, it didn't matter. It was a constant just beating up dad in the child's mind. So then you end up with a child who feels guilty if they love dad, because mom will be mad. They don't even feel safe to love the other parent. And that was a situation in that case. So the forensic psychologist testified very strongly regarding mom's alienating the children. It resulted in mom's timesharing being suspended, where mom did not have unsupervised contact with the children. Wow. And lots of therapy for the kids, of course, all the damage. Reunification therapy for dad and the kids to work through some of the issues, and strategies that therapists use for that is really what they call reality testing with the kids. So working with the kids and reality testing their thoughts about dad. And in this case, that's what they were doing is, well, you're very angry at dad because he's never there. Can you tell me a time that dad wasn't there? The recital. Did you talk to dad about the recital happening? Did dad know about the recital? So really just asking questions to get the kids to start thinking about, okay, was I really mad about this or was mom mad about this? Right. And is that really how it happened, or was there some other explanation? So reality testing their feelings, their emotions, their thoughts about that other parent. And again, age makes a big difference, how you handle these things. But that's how in this case that worked out.
Very unfortunate. Very
Yes.
unfortunate. All right. Well, heavy stuff for sure, but thank you for tuning into Florida's Wealthy Divorces, Complex Cases, and Expert Advice with Stacy Beaulieu-Fawcett. To connect with Stacy, head to blgfl.com, and please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Stacy, thanks for all the insights. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. It was great to see you, Kevin. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.